Hi, I'm Sarah Depew, and I'm running for the Texas House of Representatives in District 67. And I'm sitting here with
Sam Johnson. I'm running for Texas Congressional District 3 in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Okay, great. Well, we're here. We're going to pull issues randomly out of a hat and talk about them completely off the cuff. We don't know what issue we're going to be talking about. There are no prepared statements, no platitudes, nothing like that. So whatever you see is what you get, I guess. And we're going to pull the issues out of this awesome Batman hat that Sam here brought. Sorry, I lost an issue. You want to tell us about this hat?
Sure. This is the only hat that I really wear. Batman is my favorite superhero, and luckily at this point I have passed that favoritism on down to my sons. And I've had this hat since law school. It's been with me through many an exam, and Batman's awesome.
That's great. Now, my husband had a question that he said he's not going to chime in on, so I'll go ahead and ask it. What's your favorite Batman? I guess, between comic, Bruce Timm, or what have you?
Right. I would have to say it's a tie between Adam West and Christian Bale as far as my two favorite Batmen.
All right.
Adam West, you can't let go of Adam West, but then Christian Bale's Batman was awesome.
Are you going to answer the questions in his gravelly voice? No.
Maybe.
Nice. Okay. Well, let's see what we're going to talk about.
All right. All right, let's see. Gun rights. That's a big one, especially here in Texas.
All right. Do you want to start or shall I?
I'll start with a story. So I was at a conference in Washington in May, and there were people from all over the country, and I was telling them about my trip in April lobbying in the Texas legislature, and I have a license to carry a handgun in Texas, and so I had my gun under my suit. I always carry concealed, never open carry. And I was telling them how in Austin, you can go into the Capitol and bypass security if you have your license to carry. And the people from California especially, but really a lot of people from everywhere else, they were in shock from this story. And we got into a great discussion just about guns in general, and I really started to appreciate how different Texans' viewpoint on gun rights and gun ownership is from other places in the country. So.
Okay, great. Well, that is very true. Like, without a doubt, we are a gun culture in Texas. And I grew up with guns, had them all over my house. Mostly just rifles. My dad was a hunter, but, they weren't exactly, like, safely stored either. I've got a picture of myself. Maybe I'll post it under this video or something of me as like a 3-year-old with a loaded handgun right there as we're all playing, and oxygen tank in the back, and like that's just how it was.
So as safe as possible.
As safe as possible with
good,
my 18-month-old brother right there playing with me too. It is how it is. So I don't advocate that. I advocate safe storage, responsible gun ownership, and all that stuff. But I obviously believe that people have a right to gun ownership, to defend their home as they see fit. I think that, it is a constitutionally protected right, regardless of how you interpret the Second Amendment, whether it's a, collective right or individual right. I am pretty convinced that it's still constitutionally protected. And obviously the Supreme Court said so, so it is so.
Right.
That is how it is. So, no problem there. However, I think that sometimes people take that as to mean that there can be no legal restrictions, and that's not so.
Right.
So I do think that there's plenty of room to protect your constitutional rights and have reasonable restrictions that don't impede, what a law-abiding normal homeowner is really going to be needing their firearms for, we know that there's certain weaponry that you cannot have.
Yes.
That's okay. And, that was actually true in the founding. I was really surprised to hear that. I love watching clips of Antonin Scalia and a bunch of the other justices, but there's one I really love of him talking about weapons that were restricted during the founding of the nation that were used specifically for intimidation. And so you do not have a constitutionally protected right to intimidate others. Those folks who, stand outside, mosques, or, if a group of, mothers against was it Mothers for what is that organization called? Help me out here.
I know the
they were
organization.
they were meeting in restaurants, and these gun enthusiasts would stand outside there for hours waiting for them to leave.
Right, with their AR-15 in their hands.
Yeah, you saw that. I don't think that's a constitutionally protected right. You don't have the right to intimidate people and threaten them and make them feel unsafe. For them to meet and talk about whatever they want to talk about. So, that's kind of where I'm at on it in a nutshell.
Right.
So I'm going to kick it to you.
Yeah, and I don't want to be boring, but I really agree with a lot of what you said. I mean, I think it's a constitutional right. I think that it's a right people have to defend themselves and defend their families. But it does need to be a right that's exercised responsibly. And what I told my wife before she ever shot a gun was the first time you shoot a gun, you learn immediately how serious it is and how dangerous it really can be. And that's one way you can really acquire respect for how you need to keep it safe and why we need people who know how to safely own and operate a firearm as the only ones that are walking around with them or maybe even have them. And but I agree that there are restrictions that make sense, and it, we have a duty to protect the public at large. And as you know, and as y'all know, there have been a lot of events, very unfortunately, in the last 10, 20 years in particular, where people have abused that right. And, I think we do need to take a good hard look at what's leading to that. One thing you hear a lot about is mental health issues, but then you also need to look at what types of firearms people are allowed to have access to. And I agree, it's not a blanket right to own any type of firearm that's being manufactured. I think we need restrictions so that we're also keeping the public safe.
Yeah, and it can be tough to know exactly where to draw those lines. I think most people, on any side of this debate, not all, but most people agree that the line needs to be drawn somewhere, that you can't just have any and everything that, you want. But, where we draw that line is where it gets a little trickier. And so do you have any specific thoughts as to where that line should be drawn?
Well, I think we need to look at two places. Like I said, we need to look at having better restrictions on who is allowed to acquire firearms and make sure that they're qualified to own and operate them. But I also do think we need to consider removing high-capacity magazines from the market. I think we need to look at taking the rifles that hold those magazines out of the hands of the everyday public who doesn't really know what they're doing or who might have harmful intentions, to try and reduce their ability to access those things. So,
yeah, I'm in complete agreement with that.
But it's hard to say where that line is, right?
Yeah.
And that's the importance of having these conversations. And I think that's a lot of what's missing right now, kind of in general, not even on this issue, but having that place where people on both sides of the discussion are willing to just sit down and discuss it and say, look, I want this, you want that. Neither of us is going to be happy, but we've got an obligation to the people we represent. Let's find something in the middle and try and make it workable, and then, go from there.
Absolutely. I think this absolute lack of compromise, absolute lack of willingness to be real about each side's points, because each side has some really valid points, and the unwillingness to concede that and to have earnest debate and earnest dialogue, I think hurts us in so many areas, and this is just one of them. But
right.
And I don't know if you know this, and this doesn't really fit into what you could do as a congressman, but in Texas, it's actually illegal for any state agency to enforce federal firearm laws that are not also state firearm laws. So anything that the federal government covers that the state doesn't, an agency, and the laws go, into quite some depth explaining what agencies are, covered in this, but pretty much all of them just are subject to losing their funding if even one person enforces federal firearm laws that are not also state laws.
Right.
And so I've been kind of digesting that and thinking about, what does that mean? I mean, I think the state is within its right to do that, but is that a good thing? And kind of what areas, are there discrepancy between federal standards and, state standards on? So that's been really interesting to me.
Yeah, and, and the difficulty there is, it is a states' rights issue, certainly to some extent, but when you look at the Second Amendment, that's in the United States Constitution, right? That's not, it doesn't break itself down to the state level. So it's an interesting question of kind of how that federal law preempts any state law and how states would be punished.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I mean, because obviously the Supremacy Clause makes it, extra prickly because the federal laws are,
the supreme law.
They're
of
the supreme
land.
law, exactly. Yeah. But they're not saying that federal entities can't enforce federal gun laws in Texas. It's just that state entities can't.
Right.
And so I think that, I'd be interested to see if this has been litigated to see, if anybody's picked this up. I don't know of any cases having to do with it, though. I think most people have decided that this is, fair, within states' rights, but it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything either where that's been dealt with directly. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think that one's kind of not to say interesting again, but it's something to think about and mull over.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, is there anything you feel like that we haven't discussed that you'd like to, having to do with gun rights? Having to do with gun rights? Yeah, or I guess anything, but I guess we're talking about gun rights.
Well, and I'm not sure this comes down to a federal issue versus a state issue, but I do think, kind of like you were discussing, the intimidation factor, and I think when we're talking about restrictions, that should be part of the conversation. For example, when open carry became the law in Texas, I'll be honest, I don't understand the need to open carry as a civilian. I'm not saying it's an invalid desire. I'm just saying I don't have it. But I do know, the thought of me going to the grocery store, for example, with one or all of my 3 sons, we haven't run into anyone that's open carrying, but I've thought about how do I explain that to my kids, because I can absolutely foresee them saying, "Oh, Daddy, is that a police officer?" And I try very hard to tell the truth to my kids. So I would say no, and then they would say, "Well, why is he wearing a gun on his belt?" And so, for me, that's a conversation I don't want to have with such a young mind. And so I think, even my oldest son is 6, and even at his age, he knows how dangerous guns can be. And so I think we need to look at kind of what are our kids seeing too, if we have people walking around with weapons, whether it's someone open carrying who has a license, or someone carrying a rifle because that's the law that they're allowed to do that. So anyway, I just wanted to throw in there that I think that needs to be another aspect of the discussion, is kind of the impact that has on a more personal level, as far as intimidating other adults and children too.
I think that's a really good point. And when you talk about it on a personal level, a lot of people don't really stop and think, am I really the right person to be having a gun for whatever reason? And I'm actually thinking more about the risk of suicide, depression and so forth. And, I'll be completely 100% honest here that that's actually why we don't have guns. When I moved in with my husband, he had to firearms, and I asked him to get rid of them because I had a history of depression. Not that I thought I was going to, do anything,
Right.
but it's just that self-awareness of, you don't want to go there. And so I do wish a lot more people would, take a moment, have some introspection, and say, is this really the right choice for me? Is this the right choice for me at this time in my life? I feel totally safe around them, but at the same time, and, we've got 2 small children. We have a 9-month-old and a 2.5-year-old, and I definitely feel like that was the right call to get rid of them, especially with how good my son is at getting into every single thing, no matter how well we lock it up. Like,
they'll do that.
Oh my gosh, you put like 7 straps on a cabinet and he's still in there. I don't even know how that happens. So you go into our kitchen and find out. Like,
right.
Nothing we own is in cabinets, it seems. Anyhow, but that's beside the point. Like, I know they're safe, so there are ways to keep it safe, but I wish more people had the conversations with their families and really thought about, is this the right choice for me at this time?
Right.
Or could I give this to a relative to hold until, my kids are older, or until I'm through with this rough patch, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? I think that's an important piece. And I don't remember the statistics exactly, but, it's also just logical. But statistics do back it up that people with firearms in the home are far more likely to use them on themselves than if there wasn't anything in the home. They're more likely to, they're more likely to actually follow through with a suicide if there is a firearm accessible.
Right,
and
right.
So that's I think needs to be a realistic part of the conversation.
It's a very serious topic, and it mandates very serious consideration. My wife didn't grow up with guns around at all, and it sounds more like you. My dad had his rifles under the bed. They weren't locked up. Shotgun under the bed. I knew where the pistol was in the garage. And I never messed with them, but that doesn't mean someone else wouldn't have either. And so it was a big topic of discussion for us, and we took it very seriously. And even for someone like me who grew up hunting and grew up around guns, and already knew a lot about gun safety, when I got my license to carry, I took a private lesson on gun safety and marksmanship too, just to make sure that I was up to speed on, thinking about things the right way and really doing things safely.
That's really smart.
So, you'd like to think most people that own guns would be doing that. And I think a lot of gun owners are very safety conscious. But there's obviously exceptions whenever you're dealing with the general public. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I can't really think of anything else to add at the moment. You?
No, I think again it's such a big topic.
It's
almost hard to have really a full in-depth conversation without like hearings and research being done and all sorts of stuff. But I think we've done a pretty good job of covering the issues, that come to mind for most people.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too. So I really appreciate you coming here and talking to me about gun rights. I appreciate you sitting on my couch and, bringing your hat for us to draw the issue.
And Batman didn't use guns, by the way.
That's right. That's right. Well, he used, other, potentially lethal weaponry, I would say.
Yes, he's got cool gadgets and millions of dollars. So,
wasn't he a billionaire?
Yes. Well, technically Bruce Wayne, but yeah.
Oh dear. Do you have an alter ego that's going to be funding your campaign? Sam Johnson's the candidate. Do you have a?
I really can't get into that.
Okay, right. Okay, so I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sam. And
thank you.
If you guys have anything you would like to hear, a future candidate, I'm going to have more people coming, sitting on my couch. I'm going to have candidates and political leaders and leaders of any number type of community organizations come sit on the couch. Whatever issues you want to hear talked about, go ahead and put them in the comments section or send me a private message, and we will put them in the hat, shake it around, and maybe it'll get drawn next time. All right, well, thank you very much for watching.
Bye.
Bye.